Well, good morning. This is John Casper with the Oshkosh Chamber. We're back. We're live again for our weekly virtual town hall meetings. We've had a nice series of these over the last couple of weeks, and today is no exception in terms of bringing some of you, the best people that we have to offer here. There's Glenn. I see him now. I think you're still muted, Glenn, in case you haven't noticed that, but. What we're going to do is, like we've been doing every week, we'll have, in this case, Glenn, take a few minutes, give us kind of an idea what's going on in Washington. Doesn't always have to be COVID-19 related, but it seems a lot of that certainly is that. And then we will go into a question and answer session with the congressman. I just want to remind everybody that they are muted. However, if you have questions to ask the congressman, please do so using the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen, and we'll take those questions and ask those questions of the congressman as time warrants, and that sort of thing. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome again Congressman Grothman to this virtual town hall meeting, and I'll throw it over to you, Glenn.
Okay, glad to be here. You all see me. We were out in Washington earlier this week for one day. Got a new congressman from Wisconsin, Tom Tiffany. I was out there on Tuesday for his swearing in. I expected to be there for an education hearing, the Trump administration, it's Education and Labor Committee, to look at how the Trump administration is enforcing OSHA laws and the degree to which they are affected by the COVID. That was called off on short notice, so now I'm back here in Wisconsin. Obviously, most of what we'll talk about today is the COVID, what I've been able to try to do to help Wisconsin here, the bills that have been out there. Last week, we took up the fourth COVID bill, something I voted against. I want to talk about that a little bit and explain my concerns with it. Right now in Washington, there is a shocking lack of regard for the amount of debt that we are bringing up. There was a bill last week for $3 trillion. We had already passed 3 bills that totaled about $3 trillion. So, and so you understand, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. I mean, think about that. $1 billion is a lot of money. I think that's a lot of money even for the federal government. And to say we're going to spend another 1,000 billion is a little bit out of line. Another way to look at it is $1 trillion is about $3,000 for every person in the country. So when you're saying we're going to spend another $3 trillion, you're in essence saying we're going to spend $9,000 on behalf of every person, which would have brought you up so far to about $18,000 since this crisis hit. And if you'll think that 3 months ago, we were normal, the idea that we already have to spend $18,000 per person is a little bit out of line. There were a variety of provisions in there that I disagreed with. In addition to the overall level of spending, you're familiar with these $1,200 checks that are going out. The Democrats, and I consider myself, a very bipartisan sort of legislator, have friends on the other side of the aisle, but all but 16 Democrats voted for this. And they wanted to give the $1,200 new set of checks to people here illegally, and then retroactively go back and give the $1,200 plus $500 to people here illegally who missed out the checks last time around. So I obviously felt that by itself was a non-starter. I mean, we shouldn't be encouraging people illegally regardless of the circumstance. And when you say you're in the process of driving everybody, say a family of 4, driving them another $70,000 in debt, that's even more absurd. The other thing that I'm going to highlight is in what I thought was a big mistake that I spoke against on the big bill we passed in the past. They greatly increased unemployment benefits so that we're now up to, for Wisconsin, and it's more in other states because other states have higher benefits in the first place, we're over $900 a week. We're already hearing employers who cannot bring people back because those people are making more money not working than working. Fortunately, that is going to run out on July 31st. In this bill, they wanted to extend it to next January 31st, at least another 6 months. And I can't think of a greater way to ruin the American economy than paying people more not to work than to work. You might wonder how it got in there in the first place, and this is just my opinion. These major bills, this last one was a partisan bill that basically Nancy Pelosi came up with on her own. But the first 3 bills that we passed were negotiated between the Republicans and the Democrats. The people who negotiated on behalf of the Republicans were on behalf of President Trump, his Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. Negotiating on behalf of the Democrats would have been Chuck Schumer, because any appropriation bill that comes out of the Senate requires 60 votes. It really requires both the Republicans and Democrats to sign off, and Nancy Pelosi. I have talked to Steve Mnuchin about this $900 a week unemployment. I believe, due to his status in life, he did not realize how high that is and what a damper on work it would be. I think he's a person who's worth tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, and lives in worked in Manhattan. And I think he felt by giving a $900 a week unemployment check, it was no big deal, and did not even. I just don't think he realized that most people in our society work for under $900 a week, and you're talking here an equivalent of almost $50,000 a year. And I think, quite frankly, a lot of people, if you gave them a choice between working for $50,000 a year, not working for $50,000 a year, and even working for $65,000 or $70,000 a year, they'd say I'd stay at home. So it's going to put a damper on the economy for the next couple months, and that's just the situation. I think Mitch McConnell may be an example of somebody who's been around there a long time and removed from reality. He didn't realize what he was agreeing to either. I spoke out against it on the floor. I know there were 4 U.S. senators who tried to hold up the bill procedurally, and eventually they caved in part because I think they felt they needed to do something. Another thing that concerned me a little bit, but it's done now, given that we're going so far in debt, the $1,200 payments in the past went to people who didn't necessarily need it. The big PPP loans went to businesses who are maybe doing better because of the COVID than not. And since come out with, Treasury has come out with rules saying that as long as your dischargeable loan is under $2 million a person, that they're in essence not going to audit you. So again, a lot of money that maybe did not have to be spent out. I think the justification on the part of the Trump administration is that they don't want a repeat of 2009, and they feel they just have to get a lot of money in the system. So even if one can question where some of that money is going, they feel to keep the economy going, they want that money out there. And as far as paying back the debt or dealing with the debt, that's something they'll deal with tomorrow. We had hit $24 trillion in debt. I think due to the economic downturn and the fact that less income tax dollars are coming in, I think you would expect well over another $1 trillion increase in debt this year. There already is $3 trillion spent, so you're looking about a $4 trillion increase in debt in the economy in the current fiscal year, and that's why I think they really have to be careful. They should have been careful in the past, more careful than they were, but they really have to be careful before they dive in any longer on that sort of thing. As far as other things that are going on, I think there may be another bill. It is clear the negotiators for Republicans, the major thing that they want is to get some sort of safe harbor for business as far as liability for the COVID. Obviously, the huge number of Americans who are getting it, I guess there's already been 1,100 lawsuits filed against businesses, either employees saying they got COVID from the business or customers or that sort of thing. Obviously, given the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cases out there, there is a fear in the business community that everybody is going to be sued by every customer, every employee, and it would drag the economy to a halt. So I think the Republican negotiators, and by that I mean Steve Mnuchin and Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell's kind of said this publicly. They're going to want to have something to protect the business community. And I don't think we're going to have another package unless something is done along those lines. I think President Trump, I don't necessarily agree with him, wants some more money coming out of Washington. And like I said, I'm sure the deficit this year is going up at least $4 trillion, $12,000 a person. I don't know how much higher you can go. In my personal opinion, the major thing we ought to be looking at is causing the American public to have more confidence with going out, more confidence with spending. Some of the states have opened up. Wisconsin kind of opened up. And I guess so far the early returns are good. I am still very concerned because I run into so many people who are still afraid, and maybe they should be afraid. Obviously, people are working towards a vaccine. I voted for a bill with a substantial amount of money, looking for something like that, but we still don't have a vaccine for the Spanish flu that was around 100 years ago. A lot of times these vaccines are not 100% effective. A lot of times there are side effects to the vaccines. I wish they were looking more aggressively at other things they could do to protect the public. I've been trying to publicize vitamin D. There was a Northwestern study, duplicated or not duplicated, but a similar study out of Ireland that shows that people with adequate vitamin D levels are much less likely to get the virus and much less likely to get the virus seriously. They compared countries in Northern Europe and Southern Europe. There was really no comparison where people, for whatever reason, have more vitamin D in their system in Northern Europe, much lower death rates, much less people being affected. I wish the CDC, who I'm not necessarily thrilled with, was a lot more aggressive at pushing that sort of thing and looking at other things connected to diet or lifestyle that would help people. I talked to a doctor the other day, and he talked about cardiovascular problems, diabetes, and obesity. And a study that he gave me showed that of the three, I would have guessed diabetes is the number one risk factor. Being overweight is the number one risk factor. There's something else I don't think the American public knows about. I should certainly lose some weight, but it's something I wish they would get out there, because if we go along these lines, I think we're going to make people feel safer. I have been outspoken in the last few weeks about trying to open up the hospitals more. I think the alarmist projections caused hospitals not to do any elective surgeries, including things that I wouldn't consider elective if I had to have them done to me. People were not having stents put in their heart. They were not having faulty valves fixed. They were not having other procedures to detect cancer and that sort of thing done. And I mean, that's a big mistake. I mean, what do you do when a woman finds out she's got breast cancer in September, and you find out it's spread, and she couldn't find out whether she had breast cancer in April because the hospital was expecting this deluge of people with COVID, and it never materialized. I think right now, or almost throughout this whole thing, we've had under 3 people per hospital with the COVID, and that includes hospitals in Milwaukee that might have had 40 or 50 by itself. So we wound up laying off people in hospitals, as well as people not having what they refer to as non-essential. procedures done, and I've done what I can to try to push the hospital association to open up these hospitals, primarily so people are not unnecessarily harmed by not getting treatments done, but also it's good for the economy, because at a time where we were told the hospitals would be overflowing, employees of the hospitals were being laid off. I have done what I can to make sure that we're taking care of the rural hospitals in this state. Taking the lead on a letter there, and I think so far they've done okay, but they obviously are always in a little more tenuous situation than everybody else. And you look at hospitals and say Watoma or Columbus, that sort of thing, Ripon, it's important that we keep those hospitals open. So there's a little bit as far as what's going on in the COVID situation. I would not be surprised if I am called back sometime in the next 2 weeks to vote on that. The other thing that we voted on a week ago that got in the paper was this proxy voting, where I would not have to go to Washington to vote. I think that's a big mistake on a variety of fronts. First of all, I think it's an insult to all the Americans who are working hard to say that Congress can't go to work for fear that they're going to get the COVID. Obviously, we have very high unemployment rate right now, but the vast majority of Americans are working. Why the vast majority of Americans can work and Congress doesn't have to work, I don't know. But it's more than just that. I think when Congress is not in, when you're in, you're comparing notes with other members of Congress, looking for faults at the bill. Leadership, in our case, Kevin McCarthy, and I get along very well with Kevin, but they're always going to say the deal they cut is a good deal. And when you're meeting with other congressmen, you can get the other side of the story. You can talk to Kevin's staff and have a better chance, I think, of getting your stuff in a bill. So you're going to lose that ability. Another problem with not being there is I think the bills become more partisan. I wind up sitting on, I would say, at least one conference call a day, either with committees or with the House Republicans collectively, but I don't sit on conference calls with Democrats. Usually my interaction with Democrats occurs on the floor or face-to-face in committee. I think the idea of having people not coming in is going to result in more partisanship. The other thing I don't like about it, insofar as we have a press corps in Washington, which I think should be doing a better job, I think they can do a better job reporting what's going on if all the congressmen are there. And when you go towards this proxy voting, you're aiming towards the day, and it's going to be extended, I think, longer than they want it extended, right? Or they claim it's going to be extended. You're looking at a day in which you have maybe 30 congressmen in Washington rather than 400, which means the reporters there who interview us, they're not going to get as much of a cross-section. They're going to wind up just talking to Nancy Pelosi or Kevin McCarthy, and there are a lot of interesting things the other congressmen have to say. But if the other congressmen aren't there, the press corps is not going to track them down. So I thought that was a big mistake. And I will, when we have votes, continue to show up in person, because I think that's the right thing to do by a mile. That's a little bit what's going on. How far are we into the?
Well, if you have more, you certainly feel free to share that. If not, we can move into the question and answer part if unless you have some more items.
We can talk about more things, but let's open up for questions. We'll go through that, and then I'll give you some other things that are going on.
Well, so if anyone has a question, please submit it. I've gotten a couple that came in offline here, so I'll start shooting those at the congressman. The bills that I'll call them the Pelosi bills that have been coming up. There's a good share of money that is being set aside. I think almost close to $1 trillion, 900 billion, I think is the number, specifically to help bail out states. New York, Illinois, New Jersey, and some others. That's.
This is something that the rest of the country really ought to be paying attention to. So and I was in the state legislature for quite a while, we were always very careful about making sure our pensions are funded. So when our public employees retire, be it the state employees, school district employees, employees of the state of Wisconsin, the money is there. And we have a system set up where the state of Wisconsin or the school district, whatever, every time they send in a check or every time they give a paycheck to a government employee, they also put a given amount of money in the retirement system to make sure we're funded. That amount of money is always a percentage of that person's check, and it kind of goes up and down with the stock market. I'm sure due to the dip we've had recently, that percentage will have to go up to make the system whole, but we've been very responsible. Wisconsin is about the most responsible in the country. There are other states who wind up going to the kind of the pay-as-you-go system. Illinois being the most notorious, but California and New York are there as well. I think the attitude of the legislators in those states is that eventually Congress is going to come to the rescue and they will not have to ever be responsible. And Nancy Pelosi is trying to come to the rescue and have Wisconsin taxpayers pay for the irresponsibility in California or Illinois or New York in the past. I will fight that. I think it's got to be something all of the Republicans weigh in on, because while Wisconsin is exceptionally responsible, other states have been responsible as well, and it's inexcusable that taxpayers around the country would have to, that they would be able to use this COVID problem as an excuse to bail out states that have been irresponsible for 30 or 40 years. I don't believe the Republicans would ever agree to that. I sure hope they would not. And I will certainly weigh in. That's not something we should do, and I would not vote for a bill with that sort of provision in there.
Okay, great. Question that came in, and your thoughts in terms of besides trying to increase people's confidence, what specifically do you feel we need to do to get the economy going and protect unemployed Wisconsinites from financial hardship?
Well, I think the big thing is just confidence to go out and go to the restaurants and go to the retail outlets. You know, the restaurant is such a big thing because there you're not just talking about the restaurants, you're talking about agriculture. And as people began to eat on the food stores, and actually I think a lot of the grocery stores are even ahead of the game here because you have to buy food somewhere. So if you're not going out to eat, you're buying from the grocery stores. But as people wouldn't go to the restaurants, I think proportionally the agriculture community makes a lot more money selling to the restaurants than selling to the grocery stores. And that's why confidence in the ability to go out is so important. Just so you folks know, I assume you didn't all grow up on a farm. I kind of have to learn this stuff myself. I was talking to a farmer a while back, and dairy farmer, who did expand his operation a few years ago. He felt that his break-even point for dairy was about $18 a hundredweight. Now, he took out debt to get there, but still. He anticipated at the time he put in his expansion, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, dairy, milk, the price of milk being about $20 per hundredweight. Recently, the futures for milk were under $12 a hundredweight. In other words, you know, just way under what he needed to break even. And that's why I mentioned the restaurants, because it affects not only the restaurants, it affects the entire agriculture situation in the state of Wisconsin. Another example, 40% of the corn crop, and you drive around and see all the corn, 40% of the corn crop in Wisconsin goes to ethanol. So obviously, as people drive a lot less, that's a problem. In addition to that, because the price of gas has dropped so much, insofar as the oil companies decide how much ethanol, how much gas to use, ethanol becomes less competitive. So we have a huge problem for the corn farmer as well. And I do feel you've just got to remove that fear from people. Hopefully the death rates, hopefully the hospitalization rates will drop, but they haven't dropped as much as I like. I do again emphasize that CDC and NIH and those folks have to be looking for alternatives other than just a vaccine, because we're not going to get a vaccine in the next 6 or 7 months for sure, and we might not get a vaccine for 2 or 3 years, which means we've got to find a way to, put that confidence in people. And I think that is where they should be spending more money. I mean, we've given these groups a huge amount of money. CDC got huge increases in the last 4 years by itself before the COVID, and now we've given them billions of dollars more to develop things. But like I said, I think they have to be looking more than just vaccines. I think they have to be looking at other ways for people to gain confidence. I think also they should be more blunt about mistakes that have made in the past that I think has caused the death rates to rise unnecessarily. There was, we're told online, a chain of hospitals in New York in which 88% of the people put on a ventilator died. Well, obviously, if 88% of the people on a ventilator have died, mistakes were made. The doctor put that out there. He quit because he didn't want to be part of a bad system. But insofar as the medical community is learning from the mistakes in the past, I think that's also something that should be made public so people are more confident about getting out and about.
I mean, there's no question that COVID-19 is real. There's been some speculation about conspiracy theories and that sort of thing. However, it seems everything around this issue seems to be politicized. Whether it's from treatments to the president's handling of it, his not handling of it, and that sort of thing. So, what underlying all this stuff? What's your thoughts regarding that story?
It would be sad to say that some people appreciate the crisis because they think it hurts President Trump. I hope that's not true, but given some of the things that have been said, you have to wonder. I think President Trump is doing a good job. I think President Trump himself has pushed alternative treatments. And one thing that I think was a mistake, Dr. Fauci, who you see on TV a lot, I had seen him in several panels when Congress was in session a lot more. I always felt of the 7 or 8 people in front of the room, and he was one of the 7 or 8. He didn't impress me as much as the others, but somehow he became the voice of the administration. I hope President Trump kind of broadens the number of people he takes advice from. I think he is broadening that number. I think if you look, Dr. Fauci misestimated the number of people who are dying substantially. I don't think he did a particularly good job with the AIDS crisis, where he was very prominent as well in the 80s or 90s. And I think President Trump realizes that the experts are not always right, and he's going to be hopefully relying on other people a little more in the future. A problem I have with Dr. Fauci and maybe the CDC in general, I hate to be a conspiracy theorist here, you sometimes hear it said that we spend more on defense than we have to because of the relationship between the Department of Defense and defense contractors. Don't know if it's true, but you hear it said. You also hear it said that the relationship between the CDC and NIH and the drug companies is too close. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's true, and that they should be looking for cures or at least ways to reduce the virus that do not necessarily include new pharmaceuticals. I mean, they have to look for vaccines as well, that's fine. But I don't know that they've been aggressive enough in looking at other things. I mean, I mentioned that vitamin D. There's all sorts of good stuff online with regard to that. I've talked to medical professionals who have a very high opinion of it, but they really aren't there pushing it and studying it the degree to which I'd like to, and I have to wonder why. You also got to wonder about more vitamin C. You know, you hear in China, vitamin C plus zinc is successful. Well, there's another thing that's not a huge amount of money for the drug companies, but may reduce the number of deaths and may reduce the number of people infected. And I wish the federal government were looking into that area a little bit more. Even publicizing, like I said earlier, the degree to which weight affects the number of people dying. That should be more publicized. Something people can do, and I think would react to, because there are a lot of people out there still scared. As well, they should be.
Well, it seems CDC is as wrong as much as our local weathermen are, and so
You're right. They are wrong a lot. And I try to point that out to the people in Washington. And one of the things that disappointed me, a lot of the top Republicans, quite frankly, thought he walked on water.
Right.
And I've been critical of him for, I don't know, a month and a half now, 2 months now. I mean, my leadership team knows that I think we should be looking elsewhere. He has got a lot of things wrong. He has, I'm sure he spent a lot of time in school studying what he's studying, but we all know in our lives that sometimes the experts get it wrong, and sometimes the experts disagree with other experts. And I think with regard to Dr. Fauci, I think that's true. I think he has gotten things wrong in the past, and I think President Trump is beginning to look at other experts as well.
Well, a question came in here. We're gonna switch a little bit from COVID and talk about the border. The question is, there's some commentary here. Seems that many want a porous border, and they know that you've been down to the border and experienced that firsthand. Certainly sounds like boots on the ground folks such as the Border Patrol indicate that we need to have a secure border for national security, prevent human trafficking, illegal drugs coming into the country, and that sort of thing. But the question is, you've addressed that issue yourself with Congress, but has the Border Patrol ever been invited to address Congress in person so all can hear for themselves directly from the Border Patrol agent really what's going on down on that southern border? And
yes.
And a follow-up question is, what would that approach come across as unbiased, and would that be an effective strategy?
I think more congressmen should be at the border, but members of the Border Patrol have testified before Congress. And they've kind of been gotcha hearings, but I think they do a very good job of presenting themselves. I think, as you can see from this bill that passed last week out of the House, that there are just a lot of congressmen, I don't know whether they're representing their constituents or not, who want more people to come here illegally. I mean, why would you take a vote last week saying that, say, a family with a couple of kids in it who's here illegally can get a $3,000 check on the American taxpayer? The only reason you'd pass that sort of bill, and all but 16 Democrats voted for it, is because you want more people to come in this country illegally. And the Border Patrol uniformly, I've been down there 4 times, they want a wall. They feel they need more equipment to detect people coming across. They will tell you about the huge cost in human lives and in human trafficking. And so you understand, when I talk about human trafficking, I usually mean prostitution. The number of people who die coming over the border, the additional strength it gives the Mexican cartels who make money getting people across the border. You would figure any human being and any patriot would want to put an end to it. But when I hear that many congressmen voting to give checks to people who are here illegally, I can only conclude that they don't want to enforce the border. You look at the huge number of sanctuary cities in this country, including in this state, in which they say come here, and in essence, if ICE comes to take you away or send you back to your native country because you've been breaking the law, the attitude is, That's okay. We should protect people who are breaking the law. We should keep them here. Obviously, I think it would destroy America. We're in a situation right now in which immigrants are more likely to take advantage of government benefits than the native born. Usually, immigrants, when they come here, are a big boon to the economy, and we still do need more immigrants. We swear in, I think right now, a little bit under 700,000 new people a year. But the people who are coming here legally and the people who are being sworn in legally, they have jobs, they've worked here for years, they are a boon. When we take anybody who wants to come across the border, and particularly when we're saying come across the border and grab $2,400, what do you think we're getting? We're going to ruin America. And I hate to say it, I think the reason some people don't want to enforce the laws is they feel that, well, some of these people coming across the border may not necessarily be an asset to the United States. They feel that if they start voting, maybe it would have an impact on elections. And that's unfortunate, but our country will be ruined if we continue to take millions of people a year. It will be ruined if we get a new president who, say, has an attitude of sanctuary cities are okay. We have more than enough people on the border patrol. We should give anybody who shows up here free medical care and $2,400. And it would ruin the country, which is why I do feel, I don't mean to get political here, but it's why I think it's the most important issue out there. Because if we don't begin to get a handle on this, and President Trump's done a good job right now, you know, he's holding people down in Mexico. The Mexican government is holding people rather than coming across the border. But if we get another president, say, with the policies of Barack Obama or worse, it will ruin the United States. And I don't think people talk about that issue as much as they should. Maybe in part it's because we're in Wisconsin here, and while some people come here illegally, it's not as much as, say, in Texas or Arizona or somewhere. But, you know, we are in danger of losing this country. You know, we've been around here for approaching 250 years now. You think of all the people who fought and died for this country. And it is true, though, that great countries do not collapse from without, they collapse from within. And if our citizenry lacks the will to enforce our immigration laws, America is going to permanently change from the America we've been grown up with, to something much worse. And that's why I think it's the most important topic we deal with. And it kind of shocked me that all but 16 Democrats just publicly went on the record and said, you know, we're willing to give $1,200 plus $1,200 to people who are here illegally. By the way, something else about this idea about giving out money. There's a bill out there with over 35 co-sponsors, and I think it's going to get a lot more, sponsored by Tim Ryan, to give every American $2,000 a month for the next 6 months. We already talked about the unemployment. It's interesting, Tim Ryan, who I know, nice guy from Ohio, he is the leading moderate Democrat. He ran against Nancy Pelosi as the moderate alternative among the Democrats in Congress for Speaker. He ran for president, one of those guys who didn't get very far. It's kind of sad that the leader of the conservative Democrats wants to give everybody a $2,000 check for the next 6 months. I mean, talk about irresponsible. I think in the relatively recent past and among many Americans today, you want to leave something to your children, right? You save some money. I used to do some probate estate planning, and when you pass away, you're like your children to get something. We now have a generation in which people like Tim Ryan come out and say, let's borrow another $2,000 a month for everybody so they can spend it on stuff at Walmart, and we'll worry about our children paying it off. In other words, instead of let's leave an inheritance to our children, it's let's put our children more in debt so I can buy a new TV. It's kind of sick, isn't it? But you asked your question on immigration. I think I tried to answer it. I think it is the most important issue in the country because it's an issue that if it's if we get any worse, we would just lose our country.
Well, this being an election year, no elected officials don't like to see people in pain, and I think they come up with ways to um, ease those pains. A lot of time that's through dollars. The But over $3 trillion has been spent already. At some point, I mean, you talk about leaving something for your children. We're leaving this legacy for our grandkids and kids. So when is that all going to come back to roost and for this economy?
Nobody seems to know. Obviously, it's accelerated. I suppose you could say we've pushed the day of reckoning up from whatever 2036 to 2028 or something due to the behavior of Congress over the last 6 months, even the last 3 months, I guess I should say. And it's just irresponsible beyond belief. And I will say this, and I'll be critical of the Republicans here. We sit on conference calls probably at least one a week, and all the House Republicans are able to get on them. I think they don't all get on them, which is irresponsible, but I would think of the about 200 Republicans. Well, I think right now we're up to 202, I believe. Maybe the 202, I'm guessing 130 are on the call. Until very recently, I would say of the people who ask a question, 85 to 90% of the Republicans had new ideas on how to spend money. And that's the Republicans. I can only imagine what it must be like on a conference call with the Democrats. You can see kind of what they want when you look at this $3 trillion package. So I wish they would publicize more the amount of debt, and hopefully the American public will wake up and not vote for politicians who are just promising more and more and more. And again, I want to point out, well, they've spent a lot of money out of Washington. It's not all for people in pain. It's for businesses who are doing better than they were before. It's a $1,200 check for people whose income didn't go down at all. Maybe they're getting more overtime, or they're on retirement and their pension is the same as it was 4 months ago. But it doesn't matter. Everybody's getting a $1,200 check, provided your income is low enough. So Congress is not just giving money to people in pain. Congress is giving money to people in no pain at all. They're just, whoosh, completely lost their mind.
Question that came in from the audience here is, my glasses on. The mainstream media seems to be very supportive of the liberal agenda, and pharmaceutical companies significantly support media through advertising dollars of promoting products and that sort of thing. Is there anything Congress, the president, can do to limit those types of dollars spent on advertising?
Well, we have a First Amendment. I don't think you can prevent that. I think there are a few congressmen and President Trump himself who stood up to the pharmaceutical industry. I mentioned earlier today that one of the things I don't like about Dr. Fauci is it's like, and we have to look for cures anywhere we can, but I think they're just a little bit too close to the pharmaceutical industry and not as aggressive they are in prevention outside the pharmaceutical industry. I think you can finally see after months, President Trump is distancing himself from Dr. Fauci a little bit, which is a good thing. I think President Trump, his own way of dealing with his threat of coronavirus is probably something that wouldn't thrill the pharmaceutical industry. So he's not afraid to think outside the box. But they sure spend a lot of money on advertising, and quite frankly, they spend a lot of money on campaigns as well. And that's one of the reasons when my fundraiser talks to me, there are 3 or 4 or 5 different groups that I won't take money from, and one is the pharmaceutical industry. They just have way too much power in Washington already.
As states continue to open up, Wisconsin certainly is hopefully getting closer to fuller throttle. There's been a lot of issues as it relates to safe harbor, liability for organizations, and the whole exposing yourself to, somebody who may come down with COVID-19 and linking it back to a place of business in some cases. I know that. Can you talk about any legislation that is being discussed or advanced that has that can get a serious discussion and debate going?
Right. I think, as I said before, insofar as we pass a new bill, it is apparent that the number one goal of the Republicans is to get some sort of immunity in there. I mean, we are at a position right now in which the number of people in the country with COVID is, or who have gotten COVID, as I guess is what I should say, is 1.5 million people, and over 1.5 million. And there's some trial lawyers who will look at that 1.5 million and say that's 1.5 million potential lawsuits, because you never know where you got it from. You could have got it by buying something at a store, by eating something at a restaurant, by working at an employer, and it obviously would be a disaster for the American economy. I think Mitch McConnell has made it clear that his price for another package would be some protection for everybody across the board, for businesses, for nonprofits, what have you. If we have a church and somebody gets it, we can't say, okay, I can sue the church because I went to church and I don't know where I got it, but somebody in church had the COVID, so I'll sue the church. And obviously business, same situation. So there are bills out there like that, but if it passes, it's not going to pass in a freestanding bill. There's no way you're going to get that out of the Senate with their 60 vote. There's no way you're going to get out of the House with Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in the majority. It's going to have to be done in one of these major bills, and it's the number one priority for Mitch McConnell right now. And he's publicly said, I think, that he's not going to allow another bill out of the Senate unless a provision like that is attached. So hopefully, for the good of the economy and for the fairness, quite frankly, of everyone, a provision like that will be included.
Good to hear. I think we have time for one last question. The November elections are, a few months away here. A lot of discussion, statewide, regarding ballots, voting absentee, how you get your ballot, whether, the ballot is mailed to you directly, whether you get an application to apply, that sort of thing. What's the answer here?
Well, I mean, we're stuck with the law that we have right now. We've always had absentee ballots. People say, why shouldn't everybody be voting by mail? To me, that's an invitation for cheating, okay? When you go in and vote in person, you're at a booth where nobody can see how you're voting. Your spouse doesn't know how you're voting. Your college roommate doesn't know how you're voting. If you're a member of a union, the union steward doesn't know how you're voting. When something is done absentee or by mail, nobody knows who else was looking at that ballot. Is it your parent? Is it your spouse? Is it the local community organizer? And you don't care one way or the other how you vote, but the community organizer is saying, let me help you fill out your ballot. There's a reason why when you vote, they put, little dividers up so nobody can see how you vote. And when you're voting absentee, it's not necessarily that way, which is why I think the more people who are voting in person, the better. Many years ago, I fought the expansion in one of my losing fights in the state legislature. I fought the expansion, the massive expansion of absentee voting. I mean, there was a time when in our lifetime in which to vote absentee, you needed a reason. I'm voting absentee because I'm out of town on business. I'm going on a vacation or whatever. And that day is gone. And the more people who are voting by mail, the more you have to worry that the privacy of the ballot has disappeared and that somebody else may be coaching somebody on how to vote or watching how they vote. And I think that's a tragedy. And I think the people who want all voting by mail, I can only assume they must have a motive in which they think it's better if a lot of people or a given number of people, somebody else finds out how they vote, which is really tragic.
Great. Well, with that, we will wrap this session up. We would like to thank Congressman Grothman for joining us. So Glenn, thank you for taking your time to be with us. Very informative. Next week, we have next Thursday at 10 o'clock, we have another virtual town hall with our U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin has agreed to join us at 10 o'clock. So please mark that down. We have recorded this session and it will be posted on our webpage. So if you want to view it again or share it with somebody, just direct them to our Chamber of
Can I give you a question, John?
Sure.
Can I give you a question? Are your restaurants, I know for a while they shut them down. Are they open yet in Winnebago County or not?
They're starting to, I believe, I think going into this weekend, there's gonna be a lot of that. Our city has done some good things. City Council is very happy that they've allowed for expansion of dining facilities outside, utilizing sidewalks, parking lots, that sort of thing. There's a process they have to go through to get that approval. So I mean that is happening. Some are really taking a very careful approach in terms of making sure that they are operating safely for not just their employees but also for customers. I think that's important for a lot of people. So but at the same time, I think it's public is going to be somewhat hesitant to come back full force. It'll take some time. This weekend will be a good test. And how things go over the next few months going into the 4th of July will probably be a big determinant for a lot of different things coming forward. We've seen a lot of cancellation of community events. The EAA obviously was the biggest blow to this community and actually the world when you have that kind of an organization needing to cancel the air venture. So time will tell. I think people are smart. People understand who vulnerable populations are, and people are need to be responsible and take care of themselves. So
I was just going to encourage people: eat out or take out. Support your Winnebago County restaurants.
Yeah, exactly. So, and there are a lot of good ones here. So please do that. On that note, thank you again, Congressman Grothman, and we will catch you next week. Same time on the 28th. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.